Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and all the better for spending quality time with you. And I do love to hear from you, so if you want to put a comment in the section, I'd be so thrilled to hear from you, even if it's just to say hello. I do love hearing from my listeners, so loads of love to each and every one of you. Don't forget to get that quintessential drink, whatever it is you enjoy drinking, whether it's something refreshing and cool, or something warm and hot like Irish coffee or whatever it is that you fancy. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. The clouds clustered together in the firmament, like colossal-sized grey pieces of fluffy cotton wool. In the distance you could hear the booming, distant drone of thunder, threatening to get ever closer. Then quite suddenly, there was a deluge of rain that pelted through the sky. I could hear it pitter-patter heavily onto the roof. All the windows in our house were covered with silvery droplets, some running down the window pane in streams. "Well, what have you got to say for yourself, son?" My disenchanted parents sat there on the caramel-coloured suede settee opposite me. My mother's legs were crossed defensively, her expression venomous, glum, indignant. My disgruntled father's long, lanky legs were spread out in front of him like a giraffe. We were seated in our cosy living room. I remember thinking that they looked exactly like two peevish, truculent bull terriers. They were that irked. It looked like in any second they might just pounce on me. The fierceness of these confrontations were always intimidating. My heart was pounding. I could feel its vibration thundering through my chest. My hands were clammy, my throat dry and scratchy. I know it sounds insanely silly to react so adversely to my own parents, for goodness sake, but it's difficult to convey in words how much they intimidated me. I could literally smell their disappointment in me. It hung in the air like a thick, noxious, unscented perfume. It was more cloying and discomposing than the storm outside. Why was it that both my parents possessed this incredulous capacity of reducing my self-esteem to the size of a pea? They did it every single time, so masterfully. I loathed it when they ground their teeth together, laying on their disapproval like the thick cement on a brick. These patronising conversations had been many throughout my childhood. It would seem unless I achieved first-class grades, I was always going to be their biggest encumbrance, impediment, or bone of contention in their lives, so to speak. "Well?" "I told you, it's been a challenging time," I stammered. "I'll do better next semester, I promise." "You'd better," said my captious father fiercely. "If you don't pull your socks up quick, you'll never get accepted into med school. Your grades are atrocious. Very, very disheartening for me and your mother," he said, rubbing his moustache reflectively. "Even if I do write a letter of recommendation on your behalf, with grades like yours, you'll be exceedingly lucky to be accepted. Quite honestly, I'm ashamed that you have such abysmal results. You've embarrassed, humiliated, insulted the both of us. As a university professor, it does not look good if any child of mine performs poorly. It reflects badly on my reputation. People will think that I can't teach my own son. How can I teach them? You would not expect an interior designer to live in a tip, any more than a veterinarian to own sick animals, or a dentist to have a mouthful of rotting teeth, would you? People expect a son of mine to perform well. I anticipated better for you, I rarely did. Do you know, when I was your age, I achieved straight A's in everything I did without exception. No son of mine should be getting a mere pass. That's nonsensical. You shouldn't measure me against your exacting standards, Dad. I'm not as precocious or academic as you are. I never will be." "I've never heard such nonsense, son. You're proficient. You know it. I know it. Your mother knows it. And more to the point, your teachers know it. You're trying to find excuses to plead your academic insufficiency. But it won't wash with me. I'm not easily fooled. You're competent, capable, bright, But you've just one impediment setting you back, hampering your potential. You know what it is, son. You're bone lazy, languorous, slothful like those sloth-like creatures in the Amazon basin that hang upside down all day long. You sleep late in the day, barely rising until lunchtime. You're always listless, torrid, enervated. You're home late most nights, which is the root cause of your declining grades. Last night you must have been back at about 3 a.m. in the morning. Is it any wonder your performance is so poor? That's not true, Dad. Yes, I admit it, I do sleep in at times, but most kids my age do. I work really hard. Sometimes I study late into the night. Your expectations and conjecture in me are way too high. I may be indefinite about whether I want to go to medical school anyway. You're the ones that appear to have assertively affirmed what I should be doing with my life. It's like my opinion isn't significant in the matter. Of course you want to go to medical school, Adrian. You don't want to do something mundane like law, surely. You could not be a professor like me. You lack the patience, discipline and attentiveness. Well, there are other alternatives, Dad. I'm not just confined to choosing medicine. There are a host of opportunities out there, not all of them reliant on top grades. Some of them pay really well. There's sales jobs out there, plumbers' jobs, electricians. There's so much. I'm all too aware of what's out there, son. But you need a proficient job that will provide a decent income to support your family one day. You know what it is, Philip dear, said my mother, turning around to address my father. She looked rather owlish behind her rather eclectic round glasses. A rather dramatic fashion statement for one who was always attired in such monotonous, predictable ensemble, most notably a jacket and skirt that made her look like a formidable headmistress. Adrian is always on that dreadful mobile phone of his, gassing away garrulously to all his friends. If that isn't annoying enough, he's always partying late into the night with his friends. Who knows what goes on at those parties? I dread to think. I can't even begin to imagine. It makes my skin positively crawl. Alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, girls. No wonder his results are so disgraceful. If needs must, son. Me and your mother will prohibit you from going out to any parties. Confiscate your phone from you when you're studying. Do you know in my day we never even owned a cell phone? We were perfectly fine without one. These days kids seem to be tied to their cell phones like superglue, afraid to be parted from them. It's insane how technology has overtaken people's lives, and of course their common sense. I do often wonder if there was a power surge, how the kids would manage to survive today. They're so dependent on technology. I think the whole infrastructure would collapse, grind to a halt, fall apart. Are you kidding me, Dad? I'm not a baby. You can't tell me what to do. You can't stop me from partying, nor can you take away my cell phone. Son, I think that's where you're wrong. I think you will find we can do anything we want while you live under this roof, that is. I think it's appropriate that if something is distracting or deflecting you in any way from making any progress, then it should be wantonly removed from your life. We have your best interests at heart in the long term. You need to comprehend that. We want you to succeed in life, make something of yourself. Consider this an advance caution. If we perceive that your mobile phone is an issue, it will most certainly be confiscated until you get your act together. I think that's fair enough, don't you? I groaned. Have you finished lecturing and remonstrating against me, or have you something else condescending to say? Because if you have, say it now. There's no need to overreact, Adrian. We've said our piece, but we will be keeping a vigilant eye on you, making absolutely certain you're putting in the work. If you do badly next semester, then you will have problems getting into med school. That would be a dreadful shame. You need better grades, much better. You only care about your reputation, Dad, I snapped defiantly. About how bad it looks on you to have such a stupid son. Now, that's not fair, son. I didn't listen to my father's protests, but slammed the front door behind me as hard as I could, to demonstrate the heightened level of my frustration. I dashed over to my car, the rain pelting down so hard, rather like water bursting from a gutter. My clothes were drenched, sticking to my body like limp rags, but I didn't care. I was so heartily thankful to finally climb into the front seat of my car, that became like an ethereal bubble of safety, away from my yakking, bulldozing parents. I sank back gratefully onto the soft leather driver's seat, heaving a huge sigh of relief. I briefly meditated on what had just transpired indoors. My morose, sober parents had laid into me so hard, like a dog attacking a bone, refusing to let go. In truth, I felt like I'd been pummelled in a boxing ring by a champion within an inch of my life. The verbal altercation was more internal, not physically discernible, but there were emotional bruises. It hadn't been pretty. My lugubrious folk meant well, I knew they did, but they were the kind of people who lacked humour, were usually stony-faced, doleful, petulant. My earnest father was a university professor that had a very grim view of life, taking everything far too seriously, failing to ever see the comical side in anything. They had always been unsmiling like that, from the get-go, as long as I'd known them. My parents were naturally antisocial, contained, their only friends a select group of people as formidable and dull as themselves. They believed that the world was a tough, unkind place. In order to get anywhere in life, you had to literally work like a dog. The idea of having a good time was never part of the equation. It was the intense, stern energy that they exuded that sometimes drove me to the brink of despair. I never regarded them as friends, for they were anything but. My life was governed by stringent rules, enforced discipline, as if I needed to obey the instruction of an army major. To be fair to them, though, they had given me a degree of independence, but I knew if I didn't buckle up and get serious about my grades, those privileges that I took for granted would be snatched away from me, as fast as a monkey stealing a banana from a stranger. The rain pelted down on the windscreen. I turned on to a musical station on the radio. "It's raining out there, folks. Lots of lightning outside. This is quite some storm. There's treacherous conditions out there. If you're out and about on the roads, please drive carefully. There have been a couple of accidents reported, so be vigilant. It's time to get cosy now, listening to some nostalgic music, something for us to warm the cockles of our hearts while we're indoors. Try not to go out there, folks, not in this bad weather, unless of course you have to. How about we take a trip to the 80s? Tina from Tacoma in Washington would like me to play A Cool Summer by Madonna. So this is especially for you, Tina." I could hear Madonna's voice bursting through the airways. Just my rotten luck, I thought. I'd left my cell phone inside, but I would be damned if I went into the house to retrieve it, under the eagle, watchful eyes of both of my parents. It would only cement their rigid beliefs further, affirming their worst fears about me, that their son was indeed epoxied to his cell phone day in and day out, couldn't live it without it. Of course, it was probably true. A plethora of what they'd said to me this evening was dead on right. I didn't want to admit it. I was too proud for that. If I worked as hard as I played, I would invariably get much better grades. That was a no-brainer. I was always on my cell phone, watching YouTube videos, texting my mates, playing pathetic games. I was so easily distracted, never focused, usually putting off today what I could do tomorrow. I was a great procrastinator. I started the engine up of my car, accelerating determinedly down our red brick drive towards the long ribbon of asphalt. We lived in a vibrantly green neighbourhood outside Seattle, fringed by tall statuesque oak trees on either side of the street. It was getting dark outside, as the street lights were burning brightly, enveloping everything in a pretty golden glaze. Everywhere you looked, you could see the twinkling lights of the neighbouring houses, which were a mix of old Victorian, modern, contemporary, Georgian, craftsman and ranch style. The good news was the rain had ceased. The thunderclouds were dissipating. The booming, drumming sounds of the thunder had now faded away. It would not be the first time that the weather forecast was horribly wrong. It could be that the scattered rain clouds were now assaulting a select part of Washington state, bypassing our area. I hoped that this was the case. I decided to drive to my girlfriend's house. She lived in a more rural part of Washington, surrounded by glorious mountains that towered into the sky like celestial giants. Then there was vast wood groves of Douglas fir trees, undulating fields of green turf, pretty meadows, silvery streams. She lived in an enviable, idyllic part of the world, with spectacular panoramic views, close to a town, but far enough to make you feel as if you were living in the depths of the countryside. I loved visiting my girlfriend Pam. Her parents treated me like one of the family. They were the most easygoing, convivial people I'd ever met, who really delighted in living a carefree lifestyle. They never took themselves too seriously. They were everything my parents were not. Before long I was driving down the long, windy gravel driveway, my rubber tyres sloshing through the large puddles of water, until I found myself parking outside the symmetrical wooden farmhouse, painted pale blue with white shutters. I could see the curtain in the upstairs windows twitching, the silhouette of my girlfriend pulling up the window. She leaned out of it, waving at me. "Hi there! I'm coming down now!" I climbed out of the car, crunching pebbles beneath my feet, while I walked over to the front door. I was still a sorry state, in my halfway dry clothes. 2 boisterous Jack Russells greeted me effusively. They were jumping up and down the legs of my soaked Levi jeans, their tails wagging unceasingly. "Hello, Jessie! Hello, Noah!" I piped, giving them both affectionate rubs on their backs. I could see the plump cushioned figure of Pam's mother Elaine bustling towards me eagerly. She looked as glamorous as ever, reminiscent to me of a protective clucking mother hen fussing over all her adoring offspring. She was wearing a flowery red and white dress that softened the contours of her voluptuous shape. Her neck was adorned with hundreds of red beads that jingled as she walked. Her cheery, rounded face was framed by a sea of black, buoyant curls. Her face was wrinkle-free, her skin fresh, youthful, unlined. Her flushed cheeks were naturally pink, without the application of any rouge. As usual, she looked thrilled to see me, embracing me generously with a warm, welcoming hug. "Oh, Adrian, this is such a surprise! Oh, do come in! It's so good to see you!" She studied me closely through her twinkling brown eyes. "My word! You do look a sorry sight. You're damp all over. You've got totally soaked. Your hair is standing on edge like a mad professor. Why, I do believe your face is as dark as a thundercloud. Are you sure you're all right, love? Has someone upset you? It's not like you to look so dishevelled." "I've been better," I admitted. "Tough evening, I'm afraid. I've just had a bit of a tempestuous time with my parents tonight. They're not best pleased with me at the moment." "Who's not pleased with you?" said my girlfriend, bursting through the doorway, rushing past her mother towards me to give me a huge, boisterous hug, as gregarious as one of the family's exuberant Jack Russells. "My parents. They've been giving me an earful about my bad results. They've really lambasted, berated, reproached me tonight." "Did they just?" said Elaine, putting a feisty arm on her hips, looking almost as pugnacious as both my parents had done earlier this evening, with a very contentious glimmer in her eyes that would have possibly scared even my father. "There's nothing I despise more than parents who lecture their children, going on and on about their grades, as if they define or elucidate you. Nothing could be further from the truth. Do you know, Adrian, my husband never went to university, not a day in his life. He's a successful entrepreneur, has been making big money, better than most doctors out there. So don't let those parents of yours denigrate you. It's a downright cheek. It's atrocious for your parents to diminish and malign you like this. I've a good mind to have a word with your father myself. Give him a taste of his own medicine. Men like him expect everyone to be perfect, but no one is perfect." "Well, I probably deserve it, to be fair," I said, coming to my parents' defence. "I mean, I did let them down with my poor grades. Naturally, they're disappointed in me. They have high hopes, aspirations, dreams for my future. They rarely want me to go to medical school." "Do they now?" said Elaine, looking increasingly annoyed, as if the weight of the world was now resting on her shoulders. "They have no right, Adrian. No, they have no right at all to dictate to you what you do with your life. It's your choice to make, not theirs." "But is it? I'm not sure. I mean, if I knew what I wanted to do, it would be different. But that's perhaps why my parents are pushing me. They're trying to get me to make a decision." "Now, you listen to me, young man. I know all about your disagreeable father's reputation at that university. Everyone knows what an odious, mean-spirited piece of work he is. I gather he's not kind to his students. I've heard some stories about him that I don't care to repeat. Well, I admit he's not an easy man to live with. He is cantankerous and bad-tempered. That's why Mother affectionately calls him Badger. That's my point exactly, said Elaine. If the pupils can't abide him during the day, what must he be like to live with, son? I can only imagine. It must be tortuous for you. I smiled. Elaine really did know how to make me laugh. She got so protective towards me. It was really rather endearing. Where are you going? I asked my girlfriend, who was thrusting a head torch in my hand, placing one on her own head, throwing on her anorak as if intending to go out into the dark for a leisurely stroll. Was she bark raving mad, I wondered. I'm so relieved you came. I did try to call you, but you didn't answer on your cell phone. I don't fancy going out there on my own in the woods, I mean. It can be menacing at night. I need to find my cat. I think she might be hiding under the bridge by the creek in the woodgrove. That was where I found her hiding last time. She was cowering, flinching, recoiling in terror, the poor thing. She's terrified of storms. The weather forecast is predicting that it's going to get really nasty out there. So while we have a respite from the rain, let's go find her. Bring her safely back home where she belongs. I'm worried sick about her. I did not look enthused by this idea. I was about to protest my misgivings when Elaine interceded. Sweetheart, I'm sure Dandelion can make her way home. Cats are naturally independent. Also, you know, she never wanders far away from home. She's a nervous cat. I'm sure she's fine. Not Dandelion, Mum. She's a timorous cat at the best of times. I can't leave her out there. Last time there was a storm, she nearly drowned, poor thing. She developed a nasty cold, was on antibiotics for a week in a very sorry state. The vet was very concerned about her welfare. I'm not sure it's ever wise to go into the woods at night, especially with a storm threatening to strike. Just because the rain has receded doesn't mean that it's not going to come back. You really don't want to be caught in the thick of it. If your father was here tonight, not out playing bridge with the neighbours, he would never let you go out into the woods. You know that. I'm sorry, but I can't leave Dandelion out there on her own. Anything could happen to her. It's not like her to be out all night. She loves to cuddle up to me. I know she's very wary. There are foxes and coyotes out there that could potentially threaten her life or even eat her. Before I could even say anything, Pam was grabbing me by my anorak. Come, she said, dragging me wilfully away from the entrance hall, down the path that meandered through the field towards the long row of Douglas firs, and the occasional oak tree that fringed the edge of the woodgrove, sprawling out over a vast, sizable area. I was relieved it had stopped raining, but there were puddles in the ground like miniature ponds, some that we had to jump over so as to avoid being sprayed. We treaded against the ground cautiously, our feet splashing little jets of water against our ankles, drenching our cotton socks so that our soaked feet squished around in wet shoes. Not a pleasant experience. I knew I should have been wearing hiking boots, not these impractical loafers. The luminescent white light of the moon seemed inconspicuous, the silvery stars subdued, faint, obscure, while the whooshing wind was very frisky, banging some of the branches precariously. Occasionally we heard the snap of a loose branch breaking off a bough, falling to the ground with a mighty crash, under the assault of a vigorous wind. The blustering conditions were blowing up our hair above our heads, punnelling our jackets, lowering our body temperatures. I was beginning to shiver from the cold because my clothes were already damp. The towering, robust Douglas fir trees stood up proudly against the gloomy horizon, like tall, graceful giants. Their dark, sultry shadows seemed portentous, baleful, menacing. The refreshing scent of pine was even more pronounced after the rain showers. It gave me a small measure of reassurance, but I was feeling distinctly on edge. I didn't want Pam to know I was feeling uncomfortable, but for some reason I couldn't fathom the chills that were trickling down my spine like little warning jabs. The sounds of croaking frogs and chirping crickets was extinguished like the light from a candle. All we could hear was the crashing roar of the water cascading over the rocks at the creek, accompanied by the wailing sound of the wind. All my senses were alerted as we approached the bridge that was raised high above the ground. I began to get the very distinct impression that we were being watched, but not by Dandelion, by something infinitely bigger, more sizable, potentially threatening. "Something's not right, Pam," I said. "I think we should go back to the house. Something's watching us." "Of course something's watching us," laughed Pamela. "It's Dandelion, waiting desperately for us to come and rescue her. I'm certain she's under the bridge. I can feel her eyes on us." We climbed down the high embankment, where a large white arch lattice bridge framed the creek. It was a fair height above the ground, the lower perimeter fringed by some concrete slabs. It was a place where you could remain dry if it started to rain. It made perfect sense that a cat might seek out shelter there, or anything else for that matter. I breathed a sigh of relief as we ambled under the bridge. We were about to call for Dandelion when something moved in my peripheral vision. What I saw represented the most diabolical, unearthly, phantasmal creature that I've ever seen. In fact, initially I really thought I was physically seeing a demon directly from hell, that had entered our reality through some kind of open portal. In truth, he looked incongruous, out of place under the bridge. He was probably seeking shelter there from the rain, but the rain had now stopped. It was initially squatting, but it rose up slowly on two enormous tree-trunk-sized legs, rather like the Incredible Hulk. Its bright red, malevolent eyes pinned directly on us. Its burly, thick upper torso sprawled across a vast area of about 4 feet across in the shoulder area. It towered at about 10 feet tall, with arms that dangled well beyond the knees. The upper biceps bubbled with powerful muscle definition. I even saw the muscles of the chest twinge. The creature's head was cone-shaped. It was like a tiny curve above the shoulders. That's how low slung it was. It was covered in long greyish-white hair all over its body that was tangled, matty, and really nasty. There was also a stench to him. I couldn't quite place it, rather like wet dog. There was barely not an area on his face that was not covered in hair, with of course the exception of the flat nose. It had a human shape to its body, but it was anything but human. It was like a demon covered in hair, the most terrifying, grotesque thing that I have ever witnessed in my life. If I ever saw it again, it truly would be too soon. There are no words to describe the level of fear that coursed through my veins, like electricity spiking my senses into overdrive. I knew I was in the presence of something intrinsically evil, something that had the potential to rip us to pieces in a heartbeat. The energy this thing exuded was menacing, destructive, violent, threatening. I'm not joking when I say the creature actually laughed at our fear. I sense he took great pleasure, delight in our trepidation, like you would expect a demon to behave in hell, pleased that we had been surreptitiously lured into this place of eternal doom. He began to chuckle, a wicked, low, guttural laugh, which then morphed into the most atrocious growl that I have ever yet heard, that bellowed through my body with the ferocity of a steam train. The creature's teeth were more canine than human-like. As he pulled back his lips, they glistened like sharp white daggers in the light of my torch. My hair was standing on edge. My stomach seemed to pulverize in its own acids. My heart was thundering in my chest so fast, while my brain was telling me to get the hell out of there. Why I stood there like a gormless idiot, virtually offering myself on a platter for him to devour, I will never know. But that is what I was doing. My body just failed to cooperate with my brain, as so great was my level of angst. My legs felt like blocks of cement beneath me, weighing me down so that moving was close to impossible. Believe me, I tried. I really did. But it was like I was locked under a frozen spell from which there was no escape. I felt like I was treading water. Pam was pushing me. "Adrian, for God's sake, run!" she screamed. "He's going to eat us! Move! Move! Move!" As my girlfriend started to run away, the creature pounced on her with effortless ease, grabbing her with his overlong arms, throwing her over his shoulders. He began to run with my girlfriend, kicking and screaming on his shoulders. She was crying, "Help, Adrian! He's going to kill me! Throw some rocks at him! Do something! Please do something!" It was my girlfriend's terrified yells that snapped me out of my terror. I ran deliberately after the creature, no longer caring about my own safety. I loved Pam with all my heart. I would have gladly given my life for her in a heartbeat. So now I was angry, furious even. It was now rage rather than fear that was coursing through my veins. I assure you that it was a much more efficient fuel for the body to be burning, As my speed increased, I was running faster than I've ever done. All of a sudden I saw the flowery red and white dress of Elaine stepping forward with a rifle in her hands, pointing it directly at the creature. She fired a couple of rounds at it, but they missed him every time. For a second the beast stood still, as it stared at Elaine. I've never seen Elaine look more terrifying. Her behaviour, her countenance, her mannerisms, her demeanour was absolutely terrifying. She oscillated her free arm around like an indignant octopus, roaring at the creature like a lion at the top of her lungs. The sound that came out of her mouth was almost like a growl. "You put my kid down or I'll kill you. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I'm not afraid of you. Not one little bit, you nasty thug. Now put down my daughter or I'll tear you to shreds. You hear that? I'll tear you to shreds." Suddenly the creature's demeanour changed. This time I saw a glimmer of fear in his eyes, not from the rifle, but from the formidable, incensed figure of Elaine herself. I think her fearlessness in her bold approach had disarmed him. The creature dropped Pam on the ground, gliding away, while Elaine kept shooting at him. Although her aim was good, she missed every time, as the creature successfully zigzagged away when it ran, disabling her focus. We walked away. We could hear the loud screams of the creature in the woods. It was the most discomposing, foreboding sound that we have ever heard in our lives. "You saved our lives, Mum," said Pam, rushing into her mother's arms, the tears pouring down her face in streams. "How did you know we were in trouble?" "That's the funny thing. It was like a voice inside me was telling me you needed my help, that your lives were both in danger. It overwhelmed me with such a certainty. I had to listen to it. I didn't doubt that voice." "Another thing," said Elaine. "I know exactly where Dandelion is. Would you believe it, I found her. She's lying there in the washing basket. I was about to put a load on when she sprang out of it. This happened about 10 years ago. Pam is now my wife, and I am not a doctor, I'm glad to say, but am working with her own father in his entrepreneurial business. Although I did get better grades the following semester, I never bothered to become a doctor. At least I made my parents happy, and my cell phone was not confiscated. I'm not sure if the creature we encountered was a Bigfoot or not, but by the process of elimination, that is all that I think it could have been. I learnt one thing from this experience, and that is the power of anger can override fear. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what a fabulous story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.